Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Hawken, founder of Project Drawdown.
So how do you follow Ivan Neville and Rick Fedrizzi? Tonight we're going to have a conversation with two distinguished gentlemen, Governor Martin O'Malley of Maryland and Tom Steyer of San Francisco and California. I invited these two men for several reasons. Foremost, they're both extraordinarily literate and active in their respective professions with respect to climate change. And welcoming Tom Steyer and Governor Martin O'Malley. What they do. Governor O'Malley has been called the best manager in government by the Washington Monthly, and Tom Steyer may very well be the best politician in business. Governor O'Malley came to office inheriting a huge structural deficit. In 7 years, he cut state spending by a record amount, had the lowest year-to-year budget increases of any governor during his terms. He lowered income tax for 86% of Marylanders, cut $9.5 billion in state expenditures, and completely reformed the way state government is operated and run through a data-driven management system he pioneered. He raised minimum wages to $10.10 and was one of only 7 states to maintain his AAA bond rating during the last recession. A politician who can manage finance. Who knew? Tom Steyer knows how to manage too. He turned an initial $8 million in seed capital into the $20 billion hedge fund, Fairlawn Capital Management. Fairlawn practiced and pioneered the term called absolute return, growing at an average of 15% a year whether markets were up or down. In 2010, Tom and his wife Kat joined Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and 37 other billionaires in pledging to give at least half of their fortunes to worthy causes. He chaired and supported Prop 39 in California, closing a long-time tax loophole for oil companies that is and will bring $1 billion a year in additional tax revenues for the state and for clean energy projects. O'Malley invested heavily in education and was named the #1 by the College Board in holding down the cost of college tuition. Maryland schools have been voted the best public schools in the nation the last 5 years running. Yeah, Maryland. Maryland was named #1 in innovation in entrepreneurship by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, normally not a big supporter of Democrats. Tom and Kat have also invested heavily in education, giving $40 million to create the Tomcat Center for Sustainable Energy at Stanford University. They created Beneficial State Bank, a community-owned bank and a foundation where all the profits of the bank go back to the community, Oakland, California in this case. And to start it off, they made a $26 million deposit, which then they gave to the foundation. And they also created the Steyer Taylor Center for Energy Policy and Finance at Stanford. Governor O'Malley served 2 terms as chair of the Democratic Governors Association. He was appointed to the nation's first ever Council of Governors by President Obama in 2010 and was named co-chair of the council in 2013. And Maryland was the first state to join RGGI, the New England Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Tom Steyer has cut a recent and wide swath in climate politics. He launched NextGen Climate Change, a super PAC estimated to spend $80 to $100 million in this election cycle, targeting climate deniers and candidates who are basically shills for the oil, coal, and gas industry. But they have other similarities. Both are deeply religious. Both go to church every Sunday. Martin is up at 5 a.m. in the morning reading Thomas Berry and other spiritual texts. Tom writes crosses on his hand every morning with a blue ballpoint pen, and his idea of luxury is camping out with Kat in the mountains. And both are a lot of fun. Governor O'Malley has his own band, O'Malley's March. Go to YouTube if you love Irish music. And Tom may be one of the happiest people you'll ever meet. And there's one other similarity. They both met their wives in college, both of whom are named Catherine, both of whom were studying law when they met them, and they both met them in 1986. Please join me in welcoming Tom Steyer and Governor Martin O'Malley. Okay, so I've started with a few questions, and then we'll see where it goes. The main thing tonight is to have fun with you guys. You've been having fun. But I want to start with you, Governor. In June 2013, the Washington Monthly, as I mentioned, wrote this article entitled, "Should Martin O'Malley Be President?" And I want to quote it. It said, "What makes O'Malley stand out is not his experience, not his gravitas, not his familiarity to voters, nor is exactly his policies or speeches, nor is it that he plays in a band, nor is it even the Atlantic Monthly's breathless claim last year that he has the best abs in politics. Instead, what makes O'Malley unique as a politician is he is arguably the best manager working in government today. So, if you were president, how would you approach climate change in ways that have not been tried or imagined? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?
Well, Paul, I mean, one of the things that I've learned in leading and managing other people and working with people and being in the center of, the meaningful collaborations, the schools and the other things you mentioned, is that expectations become behavior. And so, if there were one thing that I could do, and I knew I couldn't fail, it would be to instill an awareness in our people, a belief, if you will, that climate change is not so much an inconvenient truth as it is a reality to be embraced that can lead us to a more secure and prosperous future. And that's really, I think, at the beginning point, if you will, and what makes other things possible. All of the things that you talk about in Drawdown, developing new and needed skills in our people to make this transformation and to create jobs, a smart and renewable energy grid, all of these things that lead to that more prosperous future really depend upon our ability as a people to embrace this reality as a defining moment, a clarifying moment, a moment that opens up possibilities rather than something to be dreaded or seen as just this annoying or nagging inconvenience. And that's what I'd do if I knew I could not fail.
You couldn't fail. Okay, so Tom, you were quoted in the New Yorker as saying you would accept the job of Secretary of Energy, right? I know you deny it now, but that's okay, you said that. So let me ask you the same question. If you were elected or appointed to higher office, and you could choose any office, by the way, you want, it's okay. What would you do if you could not fail?
Well, I think, I would go along with what Martin said, and let me put a slightly different way of describing it. Because when you think about government and you think about leadership in a democracy, you can think about the kind of inside job of specific policies, and I think the administration is actually pursuing this very rigorously right now and trying to do everything they can without legislation to push a progressive climate policy. But what Martin was really talking about was what I think of as kind of the outside job, which is the education and the democratic process of going out to the American people and explaining actually the huge opportunity we have in front of us. And I see this as a generational challenge, which is also our generational opportunity for us to succeed. Right. And I think that going out and making Americans aware that not just that we have to do it, but that we can do it, and when we do it, and I look at this conference as a prime example of what Americans can do when they're challenged, and what they can innovate, and how proud they can be of themselves at the success that they accomplish together, that I think, for me personally, that would be a great pleasure. And I also believe, along with Martin, that getting our country to understand what the opportunity we have together to succeed is, going to be the measure of how we're judged by ourselves and by our kids and by the world. And so I think that would be a fantastic opportunity to be part of that group of Americans facing up to our generational challenge.
Governor O'Malley, I know you, and I know the literacy you have with respect to the science on climate change. But then as governor, dealing with an elected legislature, dealing with, obviously your constituents, you run into resistance and pushback and ignorance, frankly, as well as fear. What do you want to do? What do you think you can do? You have the bully pulpit now as governor. What is it that you can do that can break through that resistance?
Well, I'm very grateful to have served the people I've been able to serve in these last few years. Perhaps it's because Maryland is so close to the water, not unlike Louisiana. But for whatever reason, we've been able to accomplish some really meaningful things, whether it was the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or whether it was passing a climate change bill to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, renewable energy portfolio, the Empower Maryland initiative to reduce energy consumption. But all of those things were made possible by the awareness of our people. In other words, you can go as far as the awareness of the electorate supports and allows. And if you try to do things in ways that step beyond the will and the awareness of the people, then those will be things that will not last very long. So, like it or not, the truth of the matter is the best form of government that's ever been created on the planet is this democratic representative form of government. It requires leaders to press the envelope and to be willing to speak the difficult truths. And it also requires people of goodwill to forge consensus and to deepen their own awareness about the reality that we share, including the opportunities that we have the ability to seize together. So, Paul, I don't think that any person in executive office ever leaves after 8 years and says, by God, it's perfect now. All I need is one more brushstroke and the masterpiece is complete. But I do believe that in every stage we can deepen our awareness and forge a larger consensus that allows it to happen.
Right. Well, let me go back to you, Tom. The rate at which climate change is occurring, or the rate at which greenhouse gases are accumulated in the upper atmosphere, is far faster than the rate at which people are understanding the implications and the physics of it. So even though I understand exactly what you're saying in terms of what you can and can't do as a politician, but what is it that we need to do, politician or not, in order to at least get those in alignment?
Well, there are a couple things I'd say about that. One is, I think Americans, 2/3 of Americans understand this problem. That's the polling data. They understand the problem. They pretty much agree on what the solution is. The basic point here is it important enough for American voters to push their elected officials to get something done? And for that to happen, they have to think it's really important, that it's urgent, and that it affects them and their family. And so when you think about big changes in terms of how people view the world, it brings to mind an old saying about going bankrupt. How did you go bankrupt? 2 ways, slowly and then all at once. And that's how I believe big changes come in terms of mass understanding, you know, big groups of people coming to a conclusion that something has to be done. There's a long time where you're sowing the seeds, and then people decide in a pretty rapid fashion, wow, we're really there. You know, we've had a chance to think about this, and we think you're right. And I think that trusting the American people, trusting the intelligence and knowledge of the American people is what we should be doing, because Americans are smart. And there are always going to be some people who disagree, but the fact of the matter is 317 million Americans are really smart, and they're paying attention. They're paying attention in 2014, and they're drawing their conclusions. And I think this whole democratic educational process of citizens talking to citizens is magic, just the way Martin said. And it's magic, and people are, the group of people is very, very wise.
And it can become, and Paul, it does reach a point where it does become cascading. I mean, a few years ago, no one would have guessed that there would be such a broad consensus on marriage equality or immigration reform. There's a really broad consensus, and it's cascading. And that same awareness can also cascade on the better choices we need to make in order to catch that awareness curve up with the action curve on climate change.
Is there something we can learn from the LGBT community? Because in 2010, that was a wedge issue that people got elected on. And 4 years later, people have their tail between their legs and are slinking away from positions they took 4 years ago. That was an extraordinary thing, probably commencing with Prop 9 in California until this year in the Supreme Court, where it's pretty much a non-issue virtually. Can that happen with climate change?
Oh, I think it is happening. I think it absolutely is happening with climate change. I mean, look, you talk to any audience under 40, you will not find any people that find any comfort in subscribing to denial. It just won't happen. So I think on climate change it is happening, maybe not as fast as we want to see it happen, and we have to accelerate that. But I do believe we are reaching that same cascading point on climate change that has already been reached on immigration reform and also on marriage equality.
Right.
And let me say one thing, Paul, about what Martin's saying. I really think in the United States now, the idea of being a climate denier, I mean, people don't really want to go back to 11th grade science class. But I think when you're looking at someone who's running to be governor of Maryland, for instance, you don't really want to vote for somebody who you don't think is commonsensical, who doesn't accept basic science. And I think that's actually a trust issue. If people aren't, and we're there. I think we're there in the United States, that you really cannot be a denier of basic science and have people trust you. You have the right to have those feelings, but people don't want you to hold high executive offices.
And that's a big shift. That's a big shift from just 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And 10 years, it's not that long of a period of time.
Right. So Tom, you've been in business for, I don't know how many years, 30 years, whatever. What was that point in your life where you realized that climate was an extraordinarily important, even a civilizational issue? What was that point where you went from one way of understanding, and certainly maybe being sympathetic to climate change and certainly not against it or not being a denier, but that point in your life where you, in a sense, awakened or woke up and it changed your life?
Well, you know, I went to Stanford Business School. I was a private business person for 30 years. And as a private business person, I pretty much felt that the American political system works. You know, people have different opinions, they scream and yell, but when there's a real problem, we get together and solve it. And that's the history of America. For over 200 years, that's what we've done. We've yelled and screamed a lot, but when the time comes, we compromise and get things done. And in 2007, at the beginning of 2007, I went on the board of a great university near my home, which is Stanford University, which I love. And I wanted to think, for Stanford's sake, what are the issues where it can make a real difference in its research, in its advocacy? Where can Stanford play a role the way they have, honestly, in information technology? So I was trying to think about what are the big issues addressing our society where there's a problem. And I started thinking about climate change, and it didn't seem as if the American political system was addressing it in the way that historically we've reached across the aisle and solved problems. And that is really when I felt like this is a problem, it's our generational challenge, and for whatever reason, we as a nation, we as a group of citizens are having trouble coming to grips together with accepting the problem, looking it in the face and saying, wow, this is a problem where we're going to show how great we really are. This is the kind of thing we know how to do. And that's really when I decided I want to be one of the people in that big group of people who band together and figure out how to overcome this and how to make it a great success for us.
Was there a defining moment, a person, a speaker, a book? I mean, was there anything that...
This will seem like absolutely craven. My wife and I were actually driving in and listening to the radio, and we heard Paul Hawken on the radio. It's awful to say in public.
It
and
is.
we were listening, and we thought, wow, he seems quite intelligent, actually.
Now you know. What happened then? I mean, you had to...
Yeah. I changed my mind. Don't worry about that, Paul. I knew I was wrong.
You listened to Bill, but you listened to Bill too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill McKibben.
I did. I got a chance to hear some people, and I thought, wow, I've got to spend a lot more time thinking about that and get to the bottom of it, because I honestly did feel, as a business person, the political system here works. Traditionally, our political system has really worked, and I didn't understand why, in this case, we weren't coming to grips with this more effectively.
Right. And for you, Governor, what was that turning point on climate? Was it just a slow percolation, or was there a year, or again, where is that point? Because I think all of us here understand the basics. I think all of us here do things that really move us forward with respect to reducing carbon emissions in the best way we can. But for some people here and many people out, there are times in their lives when they understand that this is really the defining issue of this century. And I'm not saying it has been that way for you, but when did it become a defining issue for you as opposed to just another thought?
Well, from the first days of our administration, I mean, 3 of our 16 strategic goals have been all about energy, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But I suppose, some of the happiest days of my childhood I spent on the Eastern Shore, which is very low-lying areas, not unlike some of them around here near New Orleans, and really beautiful places. And to see firsthand with one's own eyes those places being overcome by sea level rise and islands in the Chesapeake Bay vanishing, I don't know, I think it's impossible to see that evidence and not be motivated and moved to do something about it.
Yeah. So experience.
Experience.
Yeah. For you, Tom,
and a love
too?
of place.
Tom?
Well, I think, one of the facts about people who are involved in energy issues and climate issues is when you scratch them, there is always a sense of nature. There's always a personal relationship, an emotional bond with the world in a meaningful way. And the fact of the matter is, the only way to think about this issue, and sometimes people put it in scientific terms, and sometimes they put it in policy terms, but the fact is this is a human issue. And it's going to, the way that it impacts people, the way it impacts their health, their love for the out of doors, our ability to make this a big economic boom the way you guys are doing, those are the issues that actually touch people. And that's obvious, that's how it touches me too.
Right, right. So, Governor, what I was saying to you, we were talking earlier in the green room, I was saying that, politics doesn't really think about eras, doesn't really think about civilization, actually. It thinks about very short-term issues comparatively. You are at a sort of crux, you're at a cross point, in your career. You have so many choices ahead of you on January 1st or whenever you term out. I don't know when it is, but soon. What do you want to do for the rest of your life? What do you want to do in these next 20 years? You have identified this amazing issue, and you have all this talent and skills, and you have lots of good friends like Tom Steyer. What do you want to do for the next 20 years?
Well, I want to do what everybody I believe in the Superdome wants to do, and that is to be of the greatest service we can possibly be to others, which with the opportunities and talents that God has given us. So exactly what course that takes. And each of us has to figure that out, you know?
Yeah, I'm asking you. I'll talk to them later.
So that's what I'm trying to figure out, Paul.
You're trying to figure out.
It's I think the Jesuits' word for that is discernment. So I'm on a journey of discernment.
Okay, you're going to say the same thing, Tom? I mean,
well, let me say this. Yeah. You're talking about short-termism. Let me give you a real short-termism answer. I'm pretty focused on November 4th, 2014 right now.
Right.
And I feel as if November 5th, I'm going to start to discern my future. But through November 4th, my future is very clear, which is I'm going to be trying to work as hard as I possibly can.
Amen.
But no matter what happens, then win or lose, draw, I mean, the world goes on. So
the world is going to go. I mean, I think one thing that's true, Paul, is I think in 2014, and I think before that, but certainly this year, we have built a base in a bunch of states around the United States where this is a first-tier issue. And we've built a base where we have a relationship with a bunch of citizens, a bunch of voters who really care about this and who have, said they care, and they're not going to disappear on November 5th. And the question is going to be, we're going to look at the upshot and say, how do we build on what we've done? We've tried to do in 2014 to help as much citizen-to-citizen contact as we could. So as many places as we could get citizens to register other citizens, to knock on doors, to clipboard on college campuses, to talk to each other about the importance of voting and why this issue is so important. We've really tried to go back to the 18th century American democracy and say, this is about us talking to each other and trying to discern, in Martin's words, the right path for us. And that is not going to end on November 5th. On November 5th, we're going to look at the results and say, how do we build on that? That's not the end, that's the beginning.
So you're building a base. And Governor, you speak to the cynicism of politics that is much about right now because of the dysfunctionality of the current Congress and the one prior to that. Speak more to me about, and to the audience, about what you believe, because it's very similar to what Tom is saying. It's very different than the idea that somehow it's just totally corrupted and the system no longer works and we can just abandon it and not vote. And I wish you would speak to that.
Yeah, I think as I was listening to Tom, I mean, the word that I hear is the word of connection and reconnection. Alienation is a choice. If we want to, we can be very alienated from one another. We can be alienated from our leaders. We can be alienated from those who don't think as we think or believe as we believe. But the real challenge here is the challenge of connection and reconnection, and understanding our connections not only with one another, but also the other living systems of this planet as we confront this systems engineering challenge here. I think the great hope of our politics right now is actually the hope that comes from rediscovering that 18th century truth, that we're actually all in this together, that we need each other, and that we're going to be more successful when we act in life-giving ways together. And I see us moving forward and not going back. I mean, we're in a race with time, clearly, but we're not going back. I mean, this is an emerging consensus, right, and it's one that all of us have the ability to bring forward and to accelerate in our compassion for and with one another.
Bill McKibben once said that when you compare the laws of physics and the laws of Congress, he said he thought the laws of physics would prevail. which is another way of saying that people will come around to what is the law. And the law is thermodynamics and all the other principles that actually create climate change. I mean, they're not going to go away.
And there's a big generational shift. I don't know exactly what's caused it, but there is a generational shift that is happening in our world and certainly in our country, that people, younger people, and by that I define as under 40, see that their greater prosperity and security will be achieved through closer connections to one another, right, and not from greater separation. And you see this demonstrated in young people's choices to live in cities. You see it in the better ways that cities are being governed. You see this in many ways, but that is, I think, of a very needed shift. Couldn't happen sooner, and there's great hope in that shift.
When we were speaking a couple weeks ago, you were saying that the pursuit of wealth, this is interesting coming from you. There's probably just two or three people out there who would like to be as wealthy as you. The rest of us don't care, really. And but you said that pursuing wealth for the sake of wealth was risking everything for nothing.
Well, let me put what Paul said into a little bit of context. You know, I've never been driven by money. I mean, it may seem funny for somebody who is a business person for 30 years and an investor. And I've never understood the idea that when you have enough, that your purpose then goes to have as much as possible in a kind of blind competitive pursuit. And really, I think the meaning of life comes a lot more in what Martin's talking about when you have a much more, you know, complete, integrated view of what you're trying to do in terms of a broader view of life, including your family and your community, and trying to leave the world in a way that you're proud of. And so I think if people lose track of that, it's, you know, we can be so competitive. Humans can be so competitive, and they can be also so wonderful. And I think it's really important for all of us to remember that we're part of a community. We are connected. We have shared interests. We have responsibilities for each other. And taking care of those responsibilities is actually a great joy. And when we forget that, I think we can get turned too much into ourselves. And so when I see people make those decisions where I feel like they've lost the broader purpose in life, I don't really condemn them, but I do feel sorry for them because I think they're missing the most fun parts of life, the most rewarding parts of life.
Right. Thank you. So, without revealing any secrets here, sometimes when I wake up in the morning on the West Coast, I get an email from you that was sent at 2 a.m. or 2:30 a.m. my time, from the East Coast, and it is about some wonderful passage you found in Thomas Berry or Aquinas or others. I guess the question I want to ask you is, how do you integrate this Jesuit side of you with the rough and tumble world of politics, which it is in Baltimore when you're a mayor, very rough and tumble, and it certainly is in Annapolis as governor. How do you bring those together as a person?
I mean, Paul, I think I don't know, how do you take them apart?
Whoa.
How do you pull them apart?
Yeah.
I mean, they both go together. My father, I'm going to give you a personal answer and then kind of the political answer, okay? Here's a personal answer. My father was a very deeply spiritual man. And on occasion, when any of his children would complain about the unfairness of this world, he would say to us, "Son, Christ loved this world and it crucified him. What makes you expect better?" So that's the personal answer. On the political answer, any of us who I think go into politics and public service for the right reasons do so knowing that there is a range to that service. And some of the things involve cutting ribbons and having everybody applauding when you say nice things about the good things that they've done. And another part of that service, which is also very real, is being willing to put yourself on that fulcrum of the difficult choices and to be criticized or reviled or hated or spat at. And that too is service. And on days when you ever want to feel sorry for yourself, anyone in public service needs to tell themselves that they are not in Afghanistan and they are not in Iraq and they have a relatively easy public job.
Tom, there's a lot of companies out here, a lot of companies at the conference hall. Is there something you want to say to the business community as a business person?
Well, let me say this. I'm not sure exactly what Paul's driving at, but there is something that I believe about business's role in the United States.
Yeah.
And that is, business is our means of affecting change. And our means of affecting change in terms of clean energy, green building, renewable energy, energy saving, is all going to come from the innovation and the drive of business. And I think that people underestimate the ingenuity and the perspicacity of American business people. I think that if you look industry by industry, you can see the revolutions that happen when American business people are freed up to try new things. And I believe strongly that the way that we're going to solve this problem is by giving the green light, in effect, to business people to go after it as hard as they possibly can. And so when I think about American business, I definitely think of them as the solver of this problem. That is what American business has done in so many industries, and you guys are doing it, and we're going to do it across the economy. But I also think that for it to happen, progressive American business people are going to have to speak up, because this has lots of ramifications in lots of different ways, in terms of health, in terms of the environment, but also very definitely in terms of jobs and in terms of economic growth. And nobody in the United States believes that we can have strong economic growth and a vibrant economy unless business people tell them it's true. So there is a huge role for business people, like the people here, to speak out publicly, to make the case that this is a great opportunity for us to make a bunch of money and to do it in the right way and to have an outcome that's fantastic. So I, as a business person, I feel really strongly that there's a dual role here, not just to affect the change, not just to come up with the innovations, but also to speak out and say, it is possible to do it. This is not pie in the sky. This is something we know how to do, and we will do.
That's what I wanted you to say.
Same question?
Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to say that you haven't said? Or we have a few more minutes.
Let me dovetail off of what Tom said. And I truly believe, Paul, that we are the greatest problem-solving people that ever formed a republic in the history of human civilization. And this world really needs us now. And part of that problem-solving also involves that we look at our politics as a tool that can also help us solve this problem. In other words, I guess my plea to everyone here tonight is not to disengage from politics. I mean, politics, we should not look on it as some sort of straitjacket, some sort of form that no longer fits us. It's a canvas. It is a canvas. And each of us has a role to play in the paint that is applied to that canvas and the sort of politics that can also serve a human purpose. It is what we make of it. And I just encourage everyone here as we advance in our innovations in green design and reimagining our world and creating buildings that can do things we could never have imagined a generation before, we also have the courage to imagine that our politics can be different. That our politics can be the politics of compassion and generosity and giving and a better future for our kids.
Thank you. Tom, the last word.
Well, the last word that's on my mind is November 4th. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that in America, I've learned a couple of things, not being a business person, but getting involved on the fringes of politics. And one of the things that I've learned is that the opinion of an American doesn't really count at all. But the vote of an American counts a great deal. And unless we, you know, I have a 94-year-old friend back in California named George Schultz who always says, democracy is not a spectator sport. We are incredibly powerful when we go out and vote. We are incredibly powerful when we go out and volunteer, and we're incredibly powerful when we go and talk to each other. And when we do that, we do really well as a people. And I think it's incumbent on us, if this really is, which I firmly believe, our generational challenge, it's important that we do those basic citizenship obligations, and at the end of it, we're going to feel very good about where we came out.
Great. Thank you both very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.